The nightmare begins. The Galactic Council's grand chamber was silent. The air felt heavy with fear. Representatives from dozens of star empires sat around the massive circular table, their holographic screens flashing with red alerts. Chancellor Veclorin, the head of the council, stood in the center, his reptilian fingers trembling as he replayed the footage. The video came from Varan 4, a peaceful colony world on the edge of council-controlled space. The footage was grainy, but the destruction was clear. Cities burned, ships crashed into the ground, and the screams of the dying filled the audio feed. But the most terrifying part, the attackers. At first, they looked like humans, but something was wrong. They wore dark, armored suits, their helmets glowing with eerie red lights. They moved with cold precision, slaughtering without hesitation. They didn't speak, didn't hesitate, didn't stop. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Kalos of the Yilari Dominion. His pale blue skin had turned even lighter. "Humans don't fight like this. They negotiate. They form alliances. This is something else. They are not the humans we knew," Chancellor Veclorin said, voice heavy with dread. "They call themselves the Terran Extermination Force." A holographic display shifted, showing a massive warship hovering over the burning colony. The ship was sleek, black, and unlike any known human design. It blocked out the sun, a dark shadow of death. Then, a new voice crackled through the speakers, a transmission from the TEF's leader. A man appeared on the screen. His face was hidden beneath a skull-like helmet, and his voice was calm, cold, emotionless. "The Galactic Council abandoned Earth. You left humanity to rot in darkness. Now, the time of mercy is over. We are the exterminators. We do not conquer. We do not negotiate. We erase." The transmission ended, and silence filled the chamber. Then the real horror began. The next video feed showed a planetary defense force trying to fight back. Thousands of alien soldiers, armored and armed, standing against the TEF. They never stood a chance. The exterminators marched forward like machines, their weapons firing precise, lethal shots. Advanced drones hovered above them, cutting through enemy defenses like paper. TDF soldiers walked through explosions like they were nothing, their armor barely scratched. One desperate alien warrior charged a TEF soldier with a plasma sword, roaring in fury. The exterminator didn't even flinch. He caught the blade with his armored hand, crushed it, then snapped the alien's neck with a single motion. It wasn't war, it was extermination. A high-ranking council member, an insectoid diplomat, slammed his claws on the table. "This is not a military invasion. This is a massacre." "They will not stop," Veclorin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We must act. Now." Admiral Kalos nodded grimly. "I will mobilize the fleet. We will strike first before they reach another world." But another screen lit up. A new transmission. This time, it was a distress call from another colony. The TEF had already moved to their next target. And this time, they weren't just destroying the planet. They were erasing it from existence. A superweapon, unlike anything the galaxy had seen, fired from orbit, turning the planet's surface into molten rock. In mere minutes, the entire colony was gone. The Galactic Council had never faced a threat like this before, and for the first time in history, they felt true fear. The first counterattack. The Galactic Council did not waste time. The very moment the Terran Extermination Force, TEF, wiped out Varan 4, the Council's emergency war protocols were activated. The largest fleet in history was assembled, a coalition of warships from the Yilari Dominion, the Vorten Republic, the Xyrath Empire, and over a dozen smaller star nations. In the heart of the flagship Starborn Wrath, Admiral Kalos stood at the command bridge, his hands gripping the console so tightly that his fingers turned white. "This is no ordinary enemy," he growled. We will not make the mistake of underestimating them. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward a planet known as Rathos 5, where TEF forces were rumored to have set up a forward base. It was the first solid intelligence the Council had. What they didn't know, what no one could have known, was that the TEF was already expecting them. The ambush. The moment the fleet exited hyperspace, alarms screamed across every ship. This can't be right. A Vorten officer's voice cracked with panic. There's nothing here. No TEF base. No structures. Just empty land. Admiral Kalos narrowed his eyes. His gut told him something was wrong. The TEF were methodical, precise. They wouldn't make mistakes like this. Then, the sensors picked something up. A slight distortion. It was already too late. A massive EMP wave erupted from the surface of the planet. It spread like wildfire, washing over the entire fleet. In a single instant, hundreds of warships shut down. Lights flickered. Shields collapsed. Weapons powered down. The TEF had been waiting for them. From the darkness of space they came. TEF warships emerged from cloaked positions, black, jagged behemoths, twice the size of the largest galactic dreadnoughts. Their hulls were coated in some unknown material that absorbed enemy targeting systems, making them nearly invisible to scans. The first strike was brutal. Massive orbital cannons fired without mercy. Galactic ships, defenseless and paralyzed, were ripped apart like paper. Inside the starborn Wrath, Kalos gritted his teeth as his crew desperately tried to reboot the systems. Override the shutdown. Now. It's not working, sir. Our systems are being hacked. Kalos's blood ran cold. Hacked? That was impossible. The Council's security protocols were impenetrable. No empire in the galaxy had ever breached them. But the TEF wasn't just an empire. They were the ghosts of humanity's past. They had spent centuries in the dark, perfecting warfare beyond anything the galaxy could imagine. And now, they were unleashing it. The massacre in orbit. With the fleet in disarray, the real slaughter began. TEF boarding ships, shaped like massive mechanical claws, latched onto disabled vessels. Exterminators in black armor stormed the ships, moving with horrifying speed. Inside the Dawnseeker, a Yulari battleship, the crew scrambled to arm themselves. Commander Varric shouted orders, his scales glistening with sweat. Hold the line. Do not let them. The blast doors ripped open. TEF soldiers flooded in, their weapons firing without hesitation. They didn't shout. They didn't waste a single movement. They were perfect killers. One Yulari soldier raised his rifle, but his head was gone before he could fire. A TEF warrior had already shot him mid-motion, a precise kill at inhuman speed. It wasn't a battle. It was extermination. Kalos's last stand. Back on the starborn Wrath, Kalos finally regained control of his ship's systems. Launch counteroffensive, he roared. A few warships, barely operational, managed to fire back. Explosions filled the void, but the TEF adapted instantly. Their ships dodged plasma bolts before they even fired, as if they could predict every move. Kalos watched, heart pounding, as one of his last cruisers, a vessel carrying over 5,000 crew, was torn apart in seconds. He turned to his communication officer. Open a channel to the Council. The officer hesitated. His fur bristled in fear. Sir, if we transmit now, they'll trace the signal. Kalos's voice was cold. They don't need to find us. They already have. The message was sent. Asterisk, this is Admiral Kalos of the Council fleet. We have underestimated them. The Terran Extermination Force is beyond anything we have faced. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting the end of our existence. If you can hear this, run. Asterisk. The transmission cut off, because in the next moment, the starborn Wrath exploded. The battle was over. But it was only the beginning. Aftermath. The warning spreads. The few survivors who escaped the massacre returned to the Galactic Council, haunted, broken, terrified. The truth could no longer be ignored. The galaxy's greatest fleet had been wiped out. The TEF had not lost a single ship. Not one. And now, they were coming for the rest. The council chamber, once a place of diplomacy and order, was now filled with sheer panic. "Send reinforcements," someone screamed. "Reinforcements," another diplomat snapped. "With what? We just lost half our military in a single day." Chancellor Veclorin could not speak. Because deep down, he already knew. The war was lost before it had even begun. The origin of the exterminators. The war was already over. The Galactic Council just didn't know it yet. The Terran Extermination Force, TEF, wasn't an empire, a kingdom, or a military faction. It was a revenge story written in blood. To understand why they existed, why they were so merciless, unstoppable, and driven by an unbreakable will, one had to go back to the moment the galaxy abandoned Earth. And the moment Earth stopped being human. 200 years ago. The betrayal of Earth. The Earth was once a proud member of the Galactic Council. It had proven its worth through science, trade, and diplomacy. Humanity had helped stabilize entire regions of the cosmos. But when war broke out between the Council and the Kevaran hegemony, Earth was left on its own. The Council deemed Earth too weak, too unstable, too emotional to be of any real use in the war. So when the hegemony's fleet arrived in Sol system, the Council did nothing. They left humanity to die. Billions of humans screamed for help. No one answered. The war lasted less than a month. Earth's defenses were overwhelmed, its colonies burned, and its people massacred like cattle. But then, something unexpected happened. The hegemony, expecting to claim the remains of Earth, found something far worse waiting for them. Humanity refused to die. Deep within Earth's ruined cities, a new breed of survivors emerged. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and leaders who had lost everything but still had their minds, their hands, and their hatred. And so, the real war began. The birth of the TEF. For 100 years, humanity remained silent. The galaxy thought Earth was dead, a wasteland where no civilization could survive. No trade ships, no distress calls, no signals, nothing came from Sol system. But beneath the planet's broken crust, in secret bunkers and underground megacities, something monstrous was growing. The survivors of Earth had no mercy left. They no longer saw themselves as part of the greater galaxy. To them, the universe had spoken clearly. Humanity was unwanted. Humanity was abandoned. Humanity was alone. So they did what no species had done before. They built something new. The first generation of exterminators was created in underground labs, engineered to be the perfect soldiers, physically unbreakable, emotionally detached, and enhanced beyond the limits of organic life. They were taught one law: mercy is a weakness. Compassion is a lie. Survival is extermination. They watched the history of their people, saw the mass graves, the ruins, the betrayal, and they understood one truth. The galaxy did not deserve redemption. And so, humanity disappeared. But in its place, the TEF was born. They discarded their past, their names, their old emotions. They shed their humanity like a dead skin. For 100 years, they trained, evolved, and perfected warfare. By the time the TEF was ready, they weren't just human anymore. They were something else, something the galaxy had never seen before. The first extermination. The TEF's first strike came without warning. A remote hegemony colony, Amkar 7, was the first to fall. The attack lasted 12 minutes. No distress calls, no survivors. Not even a trace of biological life left. At first, the Council thought it was a natural disaster or a failed experiment. No one suspected the truth. Then, a second planet went dark. Then a third. Then a fourth. Within a year, Entire sectors were vanishing without explanation. Finally, a single transmission was intercepted. It was a voice, but it wasn't like any human voice the galaxy remembered. It was calm, cold, emotionless. You took everything from us. Now, we will take everything from you. That was the only warning the galaxy ever got. By the time the Council realized what was happening, it was already too late. The ultimate weapon, the mind of the TEF. The TEF was unlike any other military force in history. They never fought traditional wars. They never left survivors. They never wasted resources on occupation or diplomacy. And the worst part, they had no weaknesses, no leaders to assassinate. Their commanders were faceless, constantly replaced by new ones without emotion or hesitation. No borders to defend. They didn't own planets. They simply destroy them. No morale to break. TEF soldiers weren't individuals. They were weapons. And they didn't just kill. They erased. Every battle was fought before the enemy even knew they were under attack. The TEF would hack into planetary defense grids, turn their own ships against them, and shut down entire fleets remotely. Then, when resistance was broken, the real extermination began. The final warning. Now, 200 years after their creation, the TEF had returned in full force. The massacre at Varan 4 was just the beginning. The ambush at Rathos 5 had proven that the galaxy's best fleets stood no chance. And now, they had sent one final message to the Council. You left us in the dark. You thought we were weak. You thought we were gone. Now, we have returned. And we will erase you. Chancellor Veclorin sat in the Galactic Council chamber, staring at the transmission. His claws trembled as he turned to his advisors. His voice was hollow, barely above a whisper. What have we done? The galactic resistance rises. The war is lost before it begins. The Galactic Council was in complete chaos. Chancellor Veclorin sat in silence, his reptilian fingers digging into the polished table of the Grand Chamber. Around him, representatives from the galaxy's most powerful empires shouted over each other, their voices filled with panic and desperation. The Terran Extermination Force has already taken 32 systems in under a month. A Zyrithian admiral roared, "We are losing entire sectors before we can even respond." A nervous-looking diplomat from the Vorten Republic slammed his hands on the table. "We cannot defeat them. Our fleets are outmatched, our defenses are useless, and every counterattack we've tried has failed before it even started." A large armored warrior from the Draxan clans growled. "Then we must negotiate with the humans." The room fell silent. Chancellor Veclorin looked up slowly, his reptilian eyes filled with disbelief. Negotiate. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the room like a death sentence. Did you not see what they did to Varan 4? Did you not hear their last message? The room remained still. Everyone had seen the recordings. The black armored warriors, moving with inhuman precision, tearing through entire battalions without a single word. The TEF didn't take prisoners. They didn't conquer. They erased. Veclorin's voice was cold. They do not want diplomacy. They do not want peace. He leaned forward. They want us gone. The chamber filled with a heavy silence. For the first time, the leaders of the galaxy truly understood. They weren't at war. They were being exterminated. The last hope, Nova Prime. With the Council in chaos, a desperate plan was formed. If conventional warfare was useless, then they needed unconventional tactics. There was only one place that could help. Nova Prime. It was a human colony, but not part of the TEF. When Earth was abandoned and the survivors became the exterminators, some humans had fallen into deep space. They had built their own world, isolated from both the Council and the TEF. For centuries, Nova Prime had remained hidden, the peaceful, independent human colony, refusing to take part in galactic affairs. But now, the Council had no choice. If anyone understood how to fight the TEF, It was other humans. A secret delegation was sent, led by Admiral Elias Carter, a seasoned human commander who had served the Council for decades. When he arrived at Nova Prime, he was immediately taken into custody. Nova Prime's leader, Governor Lyra Vaughn, stood before him in a cold steel war room, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "You expect us to fight our own kind?" she asked. Admiral Carter took a slow breath. "They are not your kind. They were born from the same planet as us," she replied. Carter's face hardened. "They are not human anymore." Lyra remained silent. Then Carter activated a holographic display. Footage of Varan 4 played in the room. TEF soldiers moving in perfect unison, slaughtering billions without hesitation. No mercy, no hesitation, no emotion. Carter's voice was quiet but firm. "This is what they are now. They do not think. They do not feel. They do not stop." He looked directly into her eyes. "If we don't fight them, there will be nothing left." Lyra exhaled slowly. For the first time in history, Nova Prime prepared for war. The Galactic Resistance is born. With Nova Prime's help, a new resistance force was formed. But this was not a traditional army. The TEF was designed to fight conventional warfare and win before battles even started. The resistance needed to be different. Smaller, faster, smarter. They began hunting for defectors. Individuals who had once served the TEF but managed to escape. There were few, but those who had survived knew the enemy better than anyone. One of them was Commander Orion Hale, a former TEF soldier who had somehow resisted his programming and fled into hiding. "I don't know how much of me is still human," Orion admitted when he first arrived at the resistance base. His face was scared, his body enhanced with cybernetic augmentations. "But I know one thing." He looked up, his gaze like fire. "The TEF can be stopped." The room went silent. Carter took a step forward. "How?" Orion clenched his fists. "They're not machines. They think like machines, but deep inside, there's still something left." He exhaled sharply. "The TEF runs on absolute control. Their neural implants connect them to a centralized system. If we can disrupt that system, we can turn their own soldiers against them." Carter's mind raced. "You're saying we can hack the TEF?" Orion nodded. "It won't be easy. But if we succeed, we won't just slow them down. We'll make them destroy themselves." The TEF's next move. Meanwhile, the TEF was already preparing for the next phase of extermination. General Cal Voss, the supreme leader of the TEF, stood aboard the warship Judgment, staring at the holographic display of the galaxy. The latest reports were coming in. Rathos 5, eradicated. Kylos 3, eradicated. Tarvin 9, population reduced by 99.8%. Everything was proceeding as expected. But then, a new report flashed on the screen. A small, insignificant fleet, barely more than a pirate squadron, had attacked and destroyed a minor TEF outpost. Cal Voss's red cybernetic eyes flickered with mild curiosity. He turned to his second in command, a towering exterminator known only as Unit 7-03. "Who did this?" Voss asked, his voice cold as steel. Unit 7-03 responded instantly. A new resistance force, composed of various species, led by defectors. Voss was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. It was a terrifying expression, because TEF soldiers were not supposed to smile. "A resistance," he murmured. "Good." His fingers tapped against the control panel. "They think they have a chance." He turned, his armored boots echoing across the command deck. "Let's show them what happens to those who resist." The battle for the Galactic Core. The moment of no return. The Galactic Core was the beating heart of civilization. It was the home of the Central Council, the largest fleet headquarters, and the oldest colonies in known history. If the Terran Extermination Force, TEF, wanted to prove their absolute dominance, This was the place to strike. And the worst part, the Galactic Resistance knew it. From deep within their war room, hidden inside an asteroid field on the edge of the core, Admiral Elias Carter, Commander Orion Hale, and Governor Lyra Vaughn stared at the incoming horror. The TES entire armada was coming. A wave of destruction like the universe had never seen. "This isn't just an invasion," Carter muttered, gripping the edge of the command table. "This is an execution." Orion Hale, the former TEF soldier turned defector, exhaled sharply. It was always going to end like this. Lyra Vaughn crossed her arms. "Then let's make sure we decide how it ends." The Resistance had one chance. One final stand before the TEF turned the entire core into nothing but ruins. The final defense. A plan of desperation. The Resistance had no chance of winning in direct combat. The TEF was too fast, too precise, and too ruthless. But Orion knew something the TEF didn't expect. They think in pure logic. Their tactics are designed for efficiency, speed, and overwhelming power. He pointed to the holographic battle map. "That's their weakness." Carter narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying?" "We make them believe they've already won." Orion took a deep breath. "We let them think they've destroyed the Resistance before we hit them where it really hurts." Lyra frowned. "And where would that be?" Orion's cybernetic fingers tapped the screen, bringing up a hidden control node buried deep within the TEF's war network. "Their central command." The room fell silent. Carter's voice was slow, careful. "You're saying we should attack Cal Voss's flagship?" Orion nodded. "If we destroy their core command systems, we can trigger a chain reaction. The TEF doesn't fight like normal armies. Their war strategies are based on machine learning algorithms that constantly adapt. If we disrupt that..." Lyra's eyes widened. "Then we can force them to turn against themselves." Orion nodded grimly. "It's a 1 in a million chance." Carter cracked a dark grin. "I like those odds." The TEF's arrival. Death comes from the void. It started with a shadow. The galactic core, once filled with stars and light, was now devoured by the darkness of TEF warships. They came in waves, an unbroken formation of black-armored leviathans, stretching across the system like a wall of death. The leading warship, the Judgment, loomed at the center. General Cal Voss stood at the bridge, watching the destruction unfold with unblinking red cybernetic eyes. "Begin the purge," his voice was cold. A single command. Then hell was unleashed. Orbital death beams fired down onto planetary defenses, turning them into glass. Entire fleets disintegrated before they could fire a single shot. Cities, some millions of years old, were erased in a matter of seconds. The TEF did not hesitate. They did not speak. They only eradicated. The Resistance's last gamble. The Resistance's fleet was hidden, buried within the asteroid belt behind the core's sun. They watched as worlds fell, as council ships fled in terror. And then, they struck. Lyra's warships came out of the shadows at full speed, a suicidal charge straight into the TEF's fleet. At first, the TEF reacted as expected. They fired immediately, tearing through the Resistance ships. But then, something changed. Every Resistance ship was unmanned. It was a decoy fleet, filled with AI drones and hacked ships, designed to waste the TEF's time. And while they were distracted, Orion and Carter slipped past their defenses. A small strike team, flying under stolen TEF transponder codes, landed on Judgment, Cal Voss's flagship. They had only one objective: shut down the TES control network. Infiltrating the monster. Inside the Judgment, the strike team moved like ghosts. TEF soldiers were everywhere, silent, efficient, terrifying. They moved in perfect unison, their armor humming with mechanical precision. Carter whispered, "This feels like sneaking through a hive of death." Orion's voice was tight. because that's exactly what it is. They reached the central control hub, a vast circular chamber filled with red holographic projections of the entire galaxy. At its center, connected to a vast network of wires and cables, stood Cal Voss. He was no longer fully human. His body was more machine than flesh, his red cybernetic eyes glowing like fire. "I knew you would come," he said without turning around. Carter lifted his weapon. "Then you should have been ready for this." He fired. But the bullet never reached Cale. The air warped, and suddenly, Carter was on the ground, his body frozen mid-motion. Orion barely dodged the counterattack, rolling behind cover as Cale turned toward him. "You are a defect," Cale said, voice completely devoid of emotion, a broken weapon that refused to serve its purpose. Orion clenched his fists. "I am still human." Cale tilted his head. "Then you will die as one." The battle inside Judgment had begun. The fall of Judgment. Orion's team fought with everything they had. Carter, despite being injured, planted an EMP charge at the heart of the control systems. The Resistance fleet, still losing ships by the second, bought them as much time as possible. Cal Voss moved like a specter of death, his cybernetic body twisting through gunfire like it was nothing. But Orion was faster, stronger, more human. With a final, desperate strike, Orion plunged a plasma blade into Cal's chest. The TEF general staggered, his systems overloading, his body failing. And then Carter detonated the EMP. A shockwave of disruption surged through the ship. Across the entire core, TEF warships began shutting down. Their coordination collapsed. They turned against each other, their own AI-driven fleets no longer able to distinguish friend from foe. The unstoppable machine of war had been broken. The end of the nightmare, or the beginning. As the Judgment exploded in the void of space, Orion and Carter barely escaped the wreckage. The battle was over. The TEF had been crippled, but Orion knew the truth. This was not the end. Cal's final words echoed in his mind. "You cannot stop what has already begun." The TEF had fallen, but somewhere in the darkness of space, something far worse was waiting. The leader's last stand. The silence after the storm. The void of space was never silent. Not truly. Even in the aftermath of war, the echoes of destruction lingered. Burning wreckage, drifting bodies, and the dying embers of shattered warships. The battle for the galactic core had ended, and against all odds, the Resistance had won. But victory felt hollow. Inside the wreckage of the TEF's fallen flagship, Judgment, a battered and bleeding Orion Hale stumbled through the ruins. His cybernetic limbs sparked, his breathing ragged. Behind him, Admiral Elias Carter leaned against a ruined console, his leg broken, his arm clutching his bleeding side. They had done it. They had shut down the TEF's command network, throwing their war machine into chaos. The once unstoppable exterminators were now disoriented, vulnerable, lost. And yet, Orion felt no relief. Because Cal Voss was still alive. And as long as he lived, the war was not truly over. Cal Voss, the last monster of Earth. Somewhere deep within the ruined flagship, General Cal Voss still stood. His cybernetic body was failing. Sparks danced across his armor, his advanced neural implants fried by the Resistance's EMP strike. His once flawless mechanical mind was now fragmented, struggling to function. For the first time in centuries, he felt something he had erased long ago. Pain. He staggered forward, his glowing red eyes flickering, his once perfect movement now slow and unnatural. This wasn't fear. He did not fear death. But he had failed, and failure was unacceptable. The TEF had one purpose: to erase the galaxy's filth, to finish what humanity had started, to complete the final purge. But now, the Resistance had broken them. The mission had collapsed. Cal's hands clenched into fists, his metal fingers digging into his own palm until the synthetic skin tore open, revealing cold steel beneath. He could not allow this. There was only one thing left to do. He needed to finish the job himself. The chase through the wreckage. Orion knew Cal wasn't dead. A man like that, a monster like that, didn't just die quietly. With Carter barely able to walk, Orion carried him over his shoulder as they navigated the ruined corridors of judgment. Fires burned, metal groaned, and the smell of charred bodies filled the air. But then, a metallic voice echoed through the wreckage. "You think this is over?" Orion froze. He knew that voice. Cal Voss. A hologram flickered to life in the corridor ahead. It was Cal's face, calm, emotionless, unreadable. "You have delayed the inevitable," the hologram said. "You believe you have won, but you have only ensured a more painful end." Carter muttered, "He just doesn't know when to quit." Orion narrowed his eyes. "He's buying time." And then he saw it, a countdown timer flashing in the corner of the hologram's display. 0:59, 0:58, 0:57. Cal wasn't trying to escape. He was activating Judgment's self-destruct system. Orion cursed. "We need to get out of here. Now." Carter grunted as Orion pulled him forward. "You think he's just gonna let us?" "No," Orion muttered. "He's coming." And then they heard it. Heavy footsteps. Getting closer. The broken metallic body of Cal Voss emerged from the shadows. He looked ruined. His once sleek black armor was torn. Half his face was missing, revealing a skull-like mechanical structure underneath. His glowing red eyes burned with pure hatred. Orion slowly lowered Carter and drew his plasma blade. Cal tilted his head. "I was designed to end empires," he said, his voice no longer calm, but filled with a cold, lethal fury. "And you are nothing." Orion charged. The final duel. Orion versus Cal. Their blades clashed, sending sparks flying in the darkness. Cal was faster, stronger, even broken and damaged. He moved with terrifying precision. Orion barely dodged Cal's arm blade, rolling under his strike before countering with a slash of his own. His plasma blade cut through Cal's side, but the exterminator didn't even flinch. Cal grabbed Orion by the throat and slammed him into the metal wall with enough force to crack steel. "You are still human," Cal hissed. "And that makes you weak." Orion choked but grabbed Cal's wrist, twisting out of the hold and driving his knee into Cal's side. Cal staggered, but his mechanical limbs adapted instantly. The fight continued, a brutal, desperate clash of flesh and machine. Each time Orion landed a hit, Cal adjusted. Each time Orion dodged, Cal became faster. But Orion wasn't just fighting Cal's body. He was fighting the entire intelligence of the TEF, the last remaining consciousness of a machine built for war. And Cal was winning. The sacrifice. Orion collapsed onto one knee, breathing heavily, his energy nearly gone. Cal stood over him, his blade raised for the final strike. But then, a gunshot rang out. Cal staggered. Behind him, barely standing, his face bloodied, his hands shaking, Admiral Carter held a smoking pistol. "You talk too much," Carter muttered. Cal turned, his systems struggling to function. His cybernetic body twitched, his programming overriding itself, trying to process the impossible. And in that moment of weakness, Orion lunged forward. His plasma blade drove straight through Cal's chest, piercing the core of his cybernetic heart. Cal's eyes widened. For the first time in centuries, he felt something he had never known. Defeat. "You?" Cal whispered, his voice glitching. His fingers trembled, reaching forward, but then stopped. His body collapsed. And Cal Voss, the last remnant of the TES unstoppable mind, was finally dead. Escape and the end of the TEF. The self-destruct countdown reached 0:10. Orion grabbed Carter, pulling him toward the nearest escape pod. They barely made it inside before Judgment exploded, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. As Orion watched from the escape pod's window, he saw TEF warships shutting down one by one. The war was over. The exterminators were no more. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was safe. Or was it? Because deep in the void, beyond the reaches of known space, a single signal pulsed in the darkness, a final message from the remnants of the TEF. And it simply read, "The first purge has failed, initiating Protocol 02, the final awakening." The aftermath, and the final decision. The war was over. Or was it? The battle for the Galactic core had ended. The Terran Extermination Force, TEF, the nightmare that had haunted the universe for centuries, was finally destroyed. Orion Hale and Admiral Carter drifted through space in their escape pod, watching as the wreckage of the TEF flagship, Judgment, burned in the void. A war that had seemed impossible to win had finally come to an end. But something felt wrong. Orion had lived through the TEF's horrors. He had fought them, studied them, and even been one of them before defecting. He knew them better than anyone, and something in his gut told him, this wasn't the real end. Not yet. The galaxy reacts. Celebration and fear. Across the core worlds, news of the TEF's fall spread like wildfire. Celebrations erupted as planetary leaders declared a new era of peace. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was gone. But even as fireworks filled the skies, some species didn't celebrate, because the truth was darker than anyone wanted to admit. The TEF had wiped out billions across hundreds of star systems. Entire civilizations had been erased, their planets reduced to nothing but charred wastelands. For many, the war had been won too late, and the galaxy was changed forever. The Council's dilemma. What to do with the TEF's remains? Weeks later, Orion, Carter, and Governor Lyra Vaughn stood before the Galactic Council, watching as the remaining leaders debated the future. The TEF is gone, Chancellor Veclorin said, his reptilian features tired and aged. But their technology, their knowledge, it still exists. A hologram flickered on the table, displaying a TEF war factory, abandoned in deep space. The facility had once produced the deadliest weapons in existence. Now it sat silent, a ticking time bomb. We must destroy all remaining TEF installations, Admiral Kalos of the Yulari Dominion said firmly. Every blueprint, every facility, every trace of them must be erased. But their technology could be useful, argued General Vakros of the Draxan clans. The TEF achieved perfection in warfare. We should use their advancements for our own armies. Use their technology. Carter snapped. That's how they started in the first place. Someone thought they could control them. The debate raged on. Destroy the TEF's remains or study them. Orion had seen what TEF technology could do. He knew that even a single surviving program, a single surviving exterminator, could lead to another war. But as he looked around, he could already tell not everyone agreed. And that scared him more than the TEF ever had. The final warning. A transmission from the void. Just as the council was about to vote, a warning flashed across every screen in the chamber. Unknown transmission. DETTTED. The room fell silent. Veclorin turned to his advisors. What is this? No idea, an officer responded. It's coming from deep space, from outside known territories. The screen flickered to life. A single message appeared. The first purge has failed, initiating Protocol 02, the final awakening. The word sent a chill through the chamber. Carter clenched his fists. What the hell does that mean? Orion's face was pale. The TEF was never just an army, he whispered. It was an idea, a program, a system designed to evolve. He turned to the others, his voice sharp. This means the war isn't over. Not yet. Veclorin's throat tightened. You're saying there's something else out there. Orion nodded. The TEF was always adapting. That's what made them different. That's what made them terrifying. He pointed at the screen. If this message is real, that means somewhere, deep in the void, the TEF is rebuilding. A new wave of silence swept through the chamber. The war had been won, but the real enemy might still be waiting. The final choice, hope or destruction. The Council now faced the ultimate decision. They had three options. Ignore the warning. Believe that the TEF had truly been destroyed. Hope that the message was a bluff or the final remnants of a broken empire trying to stay alive. Hunt down the TEF's remains. Launch a galaxy-wide search, eliminating every last fragment of the TEF's technology, no matter the cost. Prepare for the next war. Accept that the TEF may return and begin fortifying the galaxy for another war that could come at any time. The final vote would change everything. And Orion knew one thing. This was far from over. The ending. A look into the future. Far beyond the known galaxy, deep in the void of space, a lone ship drifted in darkness. Inside, a single red light flickered to life. A machine's voice whispered into the silence. Unit 01 online. Awaiting orders. 1,000 other lights flickered to life in the depths of the ship. The TEF's second phase had begun, and this time they would make sure nothing survived.